Today we're looking at Mark 4. So I'm just going to read our passage for us, starting at Mark 4 verse 1 and going till I stop. It's not very far, but if you've got your Bibles with you, Mark chapter 4. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. He taught them many things by parables, and in his teaching said, "Listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so they did not bear grain. Still, other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times. Then Jesus said, 'Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear.' When he was alone, the 12 and the others around him asked him about the parables. He told them, 'The secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you. But to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise they might turn and be forgiven.' Then Jesus said to them, 'Don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? The farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still others, like seeds sown among thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop. Some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown." We love stories. We still love stories. Whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, anywhere in between, we love stories. We've got a multi-billion-dollar industry all around stories. And good stories are memorable and they get a point across really well. And even some of the stories which aren't that great, I'm thinking Fast and the Furious. If you like Fast and Furious, sorry, but Fast and the Furious is basically entertainment at its core level, yet it still has some story and some point that it wants to get across. We've always loved stories. Hundreds of years ago, we had Aesop's fables, stories with points that would hopefully teach people, teach kids, teach people how to live life and what really matters. Jesus told stories so that people would remember them, so that the point would be memorable and easily kind of recalled. And Jesus told stories because people understand and remember stories better than anything else. I tell stories in sermons, and even in this today, I will tell a story, brief one, so that I'm hoping that that's memorable and maybe the point stays. That's the point of stories. And Jesus told lots of stories. They told us parables, and those parables have a point. Now, when we look at parables, we've got to be careful we don't look at them too complexly. They're generally pretty simple stories. They're told to people in rural areas, so probably not super well educated, and they're told about life that they would understand. So they're not super complex. We might need to do a bit of work because we're not Israelites living in kind of Palestine area 2,000 years ago, so it's a little bit different for us. But stories about kind of agriculture, sowing of seed, they're all going to get. Even 400 years ago, Martin Luther told stories at the table side. He had little things he said that people would latch onto and remember. We've also got to think about this as Mark's teaching bit. We talked about in the intro that Mark doesn't have lots of teaching elements. So where Matthew and Luke have this massive breadth of teaching that in a few chapters we get this huge swathe of Jesus' sayings, Mark just doesn't have that. This seems to be kind of that moment. And Mark doesn't have that because he knows the sayings of Jesus are around. He knows that people know the sayings of Jesus, and they're looking at Jesus' sayings as they would look at the sayings of Aristotle or Plato or Socrates, sayings of a wise person, kind of worth picking and choosing and maybe spouting every now and then. And maybe even people would say, oh, I follow Jesus because I know some of his sayings. Again, sayings of people aren't uncommon. Martin Luther had the sayings. Those stories that he told were put down in sayings. His tableside chats. He had teaching, actual teaching, so his academic side and his preaching side that was recorded, but he also had his sayings, and some of them were stories in his chats. People, even now, look at the sayings of Jesus. They will sprout them all over the place. They'll also have sayings from people like David Avocado Wolf, which I've thankfully gotten less of on my Facebook, but still get his sayings. Not sure why we trust our life to someone who chose avocado as their middle name, but that's what people do, just as much as they will sprout Jesus' sayings. My personal favourite of sayings that have been misappropriated by people, where a saying of Jesus has been used by people who don't really understand it, is that take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of mine. Pretty much it's where people go, it's much easier for me to live my life, it's nicer for me to live my life however I want, and whenever anyone kind of questions how I live my life or kind of says what I'm doing is wrong, it's so much easier for me, rather than taking that on and changing my life, just to say, no, you're wrong for bringing that up. That's kind of how people use it, which isn't what Jesus was after at all, but it's a saying of Jesus that people know and use. Clearly not followers of Jesus, though. And it was the same when Mark is writing Mark. People knew the sayings of Jesus, and actually even Jesus, when he's talking to the crowds, is saying it's not enough. There's these 4 types of soil, and this parable is kind of talking about those who would hear what Jesus is teaching, his sayings, and how it's going to kind of go in their life. There's the hard soil where it's pretty much come and gone as quickly as it lands. It just gets taken away. You know, there would have been people in the crowds that came to hear Jesus speak who were brought there by a friend. Hey, come along, hear this Jesus bloke speak. He says some really interesting things. And someone's gone along and listened to Jesus speak and gone, yep, don't care. I'm off to live my own life. That's the same today. There's going to be people where no matter how clear we are, no matter how much we explain, no matter how much our lives show what Jesus has done, they're just not interested. They just don't care. They're hard ground. They're the path. It's lands and birds take it away. It's not useful for anything. Then there's the rocky ground. Here's the story. I planted some tomatoes a little while ago, just along our house in some really a tiny bit of dirt underneath our kitchen window. It's the only bit that's going to get sun. It's very shallow. I didn't hold out much hope for them at all. I did as best as I could to dig as deep as I could, but the ground's rock hard. Put in some power feed and some sea salt to get the roots growing and strong as best I could to give it the best chance it could. But it grew pretty quick, and then as soon as heat came, it withered and died. Rocky ground where dirt is shallow, that the plants grow, but because there's no root, as soon as any heat comes, it just dies. It just cannot survive. And there's people like that today where they might be happy to kind of talk about Jesus or even say some of his sayings, but as soon as someone questions them, as soon as there's a little bit, do you actually believe in like everything that Jesus guy's about? Oh, no, I'll get rid of that saying then, because it means I'm under heat and I don't want that. There's people who, there's the thorny ground, and in all honesty, this is actually probably the most risky for us, because we might kind of be hearing this parable and going, oh, well, we're not the hard ground, clearly, and we're not the rocky ground. We've got a pretty good grasp of Jesus, and we've withstood some heat. But this is ground where thorns, where there's worries, wealth, or worldly wants, pretty much. So the 3 things that Jesus talks about that choke the plant and stop it from producing a crop. It still grows, it just gets choked and doesn't produce. And this is the danger area for us, because there might be things that are choking the word, that's stopping us producing crop. And it's constantly weeding out those things, getting rid of the things that would be choking out the plant, so to speak. And then there's the good soil. Soil where the word's accepted, where it's taken in, where it takes root and grows and produces crop. I mean, anyone hearing this in 2,000 years ago Israel understands how farming works. you get a grain, you put it in the ground, it grows, it produces more grain. You take that grain, you put that in the ground, it produces more and more. It's how farming works. And that's the idea. Mark wants us to understand, Jesus wants the people there to understand and us to understand what being a disciple is, what following Jesus is actually like, because it's more than just knowing his sayings. It's more than just knowing that the sayings are out there or saying that we understand the sayings and repeating it. It's about what it does in our life. It's about the outcome of those sayings, the outcome of Jesus' word, not just that we know it exists. That's what makes us a disciple. Discipleship is more than just that shallow surface level stuff. It's resisting that heat. When the heat comes upon us, we can resist that because Jesus' words have gone deep and taken root and are strong. It's making sure those thorns, those weeds, the kind of worries about wealth, worries about things like COVID and that kind of stuff that restricts our ability to share Jesus, making sure that's not in the way, making sure that our soil is good, that we can grow and produce crop, that what Jesus said to us, the word that Jesus planted in us, that we can then go and share Jesus with others. That's discipleship.